Welcome back to Fly for Fun. My name is Jordan, and I want to explain how to do training in an experimental versus just time building. With time building, it doesn't matter if it's certified experimental, it doesn't matter. If you have an N number, you can log the time, and honestly, in an experimental, in a kit plane, it's probably just gonna be cheaper. It's gonna be the biggest difference when it comes to time building. With training, this is something I didn't know before I bought the plane. When you go to take check ride, the DPE has to be familiar with the type of plane that you're flying. So what that means is, if you don't have a DPE somewhere near you geographically, like, you're gonna have to travel. You're gonna have to go somewhere to wherever there is a DPE that can do a check ride in your plane if you want to do the check ride in your plane. I ran into this issue with my plane. I did my instrument check ride with Chrissy in Page, Arizona, and I didn't think anything of it. Everything was good. When I was preparing for my commercial check ride, there's another DPE that comes into town from Alaska, I think, and I was just like, okay, well, if I don't have to travel, even though Page is only a 40-minute flight for me in my plane, but if I don't have to do that, then why not? So we asked this DPE that came in and is local to St. George, at least during the winters, if he'd do my commercial check ride, and he said, no, I can't. No familiarity with the RV platform. So I ended up doing my commercial check ride with Chrissy in Page. So shout out to her. She's a great DPE. If you're, anywhere near Page, Arizona, she will do check rides in a lot of different experimentals, but definitely Van's aircraft. I wanted to make this video just kind of as a PSA because I had no idea at the time that you had to get a DPE that was familiar with your plane to some degree in order to do a check ride in your own plane. That could be, if you're buying your own plane to go through training and time building, this is definitely something that I think people should know ahead of time, that you might need to do a little bit of legwork up front to make sure that whatever plane you're going to buy, the DPE, whatever DPE is closest to you, maybe they're not going to be familiar with it and they're not going to feel comfortable giving a check ride in that plane. So just keep that in mind. I didn't know that. I just, assumed DPEs could do whatever. Before you even get to the part where you can take a check ride with a DPE, you're obviously going to have to do training with an instructor. Most instructors are desperate to fly, so they're not going to say no to instructing you in your plane, regardless of what it is. Most of them are going to probably ask questions like, how long have you had the plane? How many hours do you have in it? They want to make sure that, it's not too much of a risk to fly with you. But generally, it's not going to be difficult to find an instructor to instruct in your plane. However, there's a limit to how much they can instruct you as far as demonstrating maneuvers. So when I was getting ready for my commercial check ride just recently over the last month, it's not that my plane, the RV7 as a platform, it's not dramatically different than a 172 or a Piper Archer. When I say dramatically different, I'm meaning it's not pressurized, it's not a turboprop or a jet or anything crazy. But what is different is just how it controls, right? I've got a control stick instead of a yoke, or a steering wheel, I guess, if you have an old plane. But it's also a fair amount faster, and that makes it just a little bit more difficult, and maybe I shouldn't say difficult to do the maneuvers, just different, right? So if you're gonna hop into a plane with an instructor, they're gonna know how to do that maneuver in most likely whatever they trained in. So a 172, a 150, an Archer, maybe they've had experience in all three of those, and that's what they're gonna be familiar with, and that's what they're gonna be able to perform the maneuvers in. But when it comes to, let's say, an RV7, you hop into that plane with an instructor that's only ever instructed in a 172. They're not going to be able to demonstrate the maneuvers for you much better than you're going to be able to do them just out of the box, looking at online tutorials on YouTube or whatever. So just keep that in mind. If you're going to buy a plane to build time, doesn't matter. Experimental, honestly, I think is the way to go. It's just going to be cheaper, better bang for buck value. But there are other limitations that I can talk about in a different video. The main point of this video is to say that when it comes to your training and the actual maneuvers to pass a check ride, that is going to be a lot on you, right? It's obviously, when it comes to the check ride, it's all on you. You've got to demonstrate mastery of the aircraft. But for the training purposes, your instructor's kind of limited because they're not going to have as much time in your airplane as you do. You might get lucky and find an instructor that is familiar with your plane, or they've been an instructor for a long time and they have their own plane, or whatever the situation is. You might get lucky and have an instructor that's really familiar with whatever plane you end up buying. But that is something to consider as well when you're buying an experimental plane. Even if it's an RV7, I know my RV7 really well, but you can build these a little bit different. You can get different engines. There's a couple little quirks that could change depending on how the builder sets their plane up. And to be fair, a lot of certified planes are like that. Not I've been in several 172s. None of them are identical. So every plane is going to have its quirks. With experimentals, the range of quirkiness is just a little bit further than in a certified plane. So in summary, buying a plane to build time, great idea. I did it. I think it's if you have the money, go for it. Buying a plane to do your training in, if it's a certified plane, you're probably not going to have too many issues. If you're going to get an experimental to do training in, maybe try to ask around and see if there's a DPE close to you that is comfortable doing a check ride in your plane that you're planning on buying or have already bought. Because that could run into an issue where you might have to do an entire day trip just to get to a DPE that will do a check ride in your plane. I feel like I really lucked out that Chrissy is in Page, and like I said, it's only a 40-minute flight from here. So super relieved, but it dawned on me while I was going through the process of getting my commercial check ride set up that, man, I could have really screwed myself by buying this plane, and then I have to go to Wyoming or Texas or something to find a DPE that can do a check ride for me. Anyway, I just figured I'd put that out there so that if you're considering buying a plane and an experimental plane, know ahead of time that you might run into issues come check ride time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in there.